Today we're going to tour the historic Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. Considered the National Cemetery of the Confederacy, this cemetery is unique in that it is the final resting place of more than 18,000 Confederate dead, including 28 Confederate Generals, more than any other cemetery. In 1867, the ladies of Richmond raised $18,000 to fund the construction of this monument, and Charles Dimmock, a former Confederate engineer, designed the 90-foot pyramid built from local stone and without using any mortar. The local legend is that since the pyramid was built without mortar, no one would volunteer to place the capstone. A local convict on a work detail, Thomas Stanley, agreed to the dangerous climb and in return was granted his freedom. Let's walk around and see what we can find. There are two United States presidents buried here in an area called President Circle. First that we come to is President John Tyler, who was the 10th president from 1841 through 1845. Tyler was a Virginian who served as the Virginia governor, U.S. House representative, and U.S. senator before being elected as vice president. He became president on the death of William Henry Harrison. In his last days in office, Tyler offered Texas statehood, which had been controversial with the New England states opposing statehood for slaveholding Texas and threatening their own secession. At the beginning of the Civil War, Tyler presided over the Virginia Secession Convention and served in the Confederate States Provisional Congress. John Tyler died on January the 18th, 1862. Just next to John Tyler is the grave of another Virginia president, James Monroe. Monroe served as the 5th president from 1817 to 1825. Prior to being elected president, Monroe served as a United States Senator, Ambassador to France, Governor of Virginia, and Secretary of State. Monroe was probably best known for his Latin American foreign policy that would become known as the Monroe Doctrine. He died on the 4th of July, 1831. He was originally buried in New York City, but was reinterred back to his native Virginia. Not in President Circle, but in his own dedicated section, is the grave of the President of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis, and his wife Verena. Davis was born on June the 3rd, 1808, in what is now Fairview, Kentucky. He was a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, veteran of the Mexican-American War, Secretary of War under President Franklin Pierce, a United States House Representative, and United States Senator from Mississippi. He resigned as a senator when Mississippi seceded and was elected as the President of the Confederacy by the Provisional Congress in Montgomery, Alabama. After the war, Davis was imprisoned for 2 years and was going to be tried for treason when Andrew Johnson issued a blanket amnesty on Christmas Day, 1868. He spent the remainder of his life in Biloxi, Mississippi at the Bovar estate of Sarah Dorsey, where he wrote his 2-volume book, The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government. Jefferson Davis died on December the 6th, 1889 in New Orleans. Over 200,000 mourners attended his funeral and burial in the Metairie Cemetery. In 1893, Verena decided to have Davis reinterred in the Hollywood Cemetery, along with their children. When Verena died in 1906, she was laid to rest next to him. Just a short distance away is the grave of General Fitzhugh Lee. Born in 1835 near Alexandria, Virginia, Lee graduated from West Point in 1856 and was assigned to the U.S. 2nd Cavalry at Fort Mason, Texas, along with Robert E. Lee, John Bell Hood, George Thomas, and Albert Sidney Johnston. During the war between the states, Fitz Lee made a name for himself as an accomplished cavalry officer, ultimately commanding all of the cavalry in the Army of Northern Virginia. After the war, Lee became the governor of Virginia, and during the Spanish-American War, President William McKinley appointed Lee as a major general to command the U.S. 7th Corps. He retired as a U.S. Brigadier General and died in Washington, D.C. in 1905. As we head back over towards the main part of the cemetery, let's see if we can find some more of the 28 general officers buried here. We're approaching the grave of General Henry Heath, a general whose performance in the war was disappointing to say the least. Heath graduated from West Point in 1847, last in his class, and spent time in the West fighting Indians. During the war between the states, Heath touched off the Battle of Gettysburg by leading his division into town on July the 1st against General Lee's orders. He ended up in the hospital from a rifle shot that fractured his skull. Again in May 1864 at the Battle of the Wilderness, Heath neglected to replenish his troops' ammunition or to have them fortify their position, leading to a rout the next day when General Grant attacked, something that Lee never forgave him for. After the war, Heath worked in the insurance business and died on September the 27th, 1899. This is the grave of General James J. Archer. Born in Maryland in 1817, Archer graduated from the College of New Jersey, which is now Princeton. He practiced law until 1846, when he joined the U.S. Army to fight in the war with Mexico. Archer won a promotion to major for his bravery in the Battle of Chapultepec. After the war, he returned to his law practice in Maryland, but rejoined the Army in 1855 and was serving in the Northwest until the war between the states broke out, when he resigned his commission and joined the Confederate Army. He was given command of the newly formed 5th Texas Infantry Regiment by Jeff Davis. Archer was not popular with the Texans, mostly because he wasn't a Texan. But he was still promoted to Brigadier General in 1862 and given command of a brigade of Tennesseans, where he fared better. Archer fought in the 7 Days Battle, 2nd Manassas, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville. At Gettysburg, Archer was caught off guard by a Union counterattack and was captured at Willoughby Run, becoming the first general officer from the Army of Northern Virginia captured. He spent a year in a Union POW camp on Lake Erie where his health deteriorated. He was exchanged and rejoined his brigade at the Siege of Petersburg. Archer died from pneumonia in Richmond on October the 24th, 1864. One of the most famous cavalry officers in the Confederacy was James Ewell Brown Jeb Stewart. Stewart was born in 1833 on the family's plantation in Virginia. He graduated from West Point and spent time in the West fighting Indians. Once Virginia seceded, Stewart resigned his commission in the U.S. Army and accepted a commission in the Confederate Army, commanding a cavalry unit. One of Stewart's most famous exploits was during the Peninsula Campaign, when he took his cavalry unit and rode completely around Union General McClellan's army, confirming that the Union's right flank was exposed, enabling Lee to hold Richmond in the 7 Days battles. On the downside, Stewart is also famous for leaving Robert E. Lee in the dark by taking his cavalry on another attempt to ride around the Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg. Lee had no idea where Stewart was, and without his cavalry, Lee didn't know what the Union troop dispositions were. At the Battle of Yellow Tavern, Stewart was wounded when a Union soldier shot him in the stomach with a .44 caliber revolver. Jeb Stewart died on May the 12th, 1864. One of the things that jumps out at you when you're walking around the cemetery are the rows and rows of headstones that mark the graves of Confederate veterans. Most were enlisted men who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country, but there are 2 areas that are marked off that are special. One is the officers section, where officers and some enlisted veterans are buried. Officers like 28-year-old John Milton Leggett from Louisiana, who was killed by an artillery shell at Chancellorsville. of Captain Robert Carter from North Carolina, who died from wounds he received at Malvern Hill. The others call Gettysburg Hill. Gettysburg Hill is the final resting place for over 2,200 Confederates who were killed at or died from their wounds at Gettysburg. Soldiers like Peter Gustavus Gus Williamson, son of Robert McAlpin Williamson, the namesake of Williamson County, Texas, who was in the 5th Texas Infantry and died of wounds he received from the attack on Little Round Top. The task of identifying Confederate remains and having them transported and reinterred at Hollywood fell to Dr. Rufus Weaver, who inherited the task after his father, Samuel Weaver, who was originally chosen, was killed in a railroad accident before he could start. As the bodies were shipped to Richmond from Pennsylvania, former Major General George Pickett, who was made famous for his charge on the third day at Gettysburg, would meet each one of the shipments at the railroad station and lead a procession of dignitaries to the cemetery. Pickett's division alone suffered almost 2,700 casualties on that fateful day. 498 killed, 643 wounded, and 1,500 captured. Upon his death from scarlet fever in 1875, Pickett was laid to rest on Gettysburg Hill with his fallen comrades.